The night was heavy, as if the sky carried the same burden as Flavio. He held the steering wheel tightly as the city lights flashed past. Blurred by tears, he refused to shed. Each illuminated streetlight seemed like a marker of time, a cruel reminder that time was against him. Marcelo's voice still echoed in his mind. 1 year tops. It was a sentence he never expected to hear, especially from him, a longtime friend. A doctor, yes, but also someone who knew every detail of his life and his loneliness. Flavio tried to focus on the road, but his mind wandered. Rushed thoughts mixed with memories of moments he never valued. Forgotten birthdays, friends who drifted away, lonely nights in a luxurious house that felt more like a gilded prison. He had everything, except someone who really mattered. As the city continued its rhythm, Flavio felt as if the world was moving too fast, and he too slow to keep up. His head throbbed with a single question. Why did I accumulate so much if none of it can save me now? Finally, he parked the car in front of his house. He stood there for a few minutes, staring into space, while the heavy news settled on his shoulders. When the first tear finally fell, it was as if a dam had broken. The man who had always prided himself on being strong, independent, and unshakable was now there, broken, with no one to comfort him. Hook, what would you do if you knew you had little time left to live? For Flavio, it was not only the prospect of death that frightened him, but the crushing weight of a lonely life, full of wrong choices and regrets that now seemed irreparable. Flavio remained inside the car, motionless, while the darkness of the night seemed to envelop his soul. The silence around him was deafening, interrupted only by the muffled sound of his ragged breathing. Finally, he gathered the strength to leave. Each step toward the front door seemed to weigh tons, as if he had to climb a mountain just to cross that threshold. The house welcomed him with the same coldness as always. The luxurious furniture, the walls decorated with works of art, and the imported rugs were silent witnesses to the life he had built. Comfort, thought Flavio with a bitter smile. What's the point of all this, if in the end, there's no one here to share it with me? He climbed the stairs, each step a cruel reminder of the emptiness inside him. When he reached his room, he threw himself on the bed, without even taking off his shoes. The silk sheets, so expensive and impeccable, contrasted with the despair that consumed him. The crying came like a storm, uncontrollable, overwhelming. He sobbed like a child, lamenting not only the little time he had left, but the wasted opportunities, the connections he never cultivated. I should have adopted. I should have done something, he murmured, his voice barely audible in the oppressive silence of the room. Flavio had wanted to be a father all his life. He dreamed of passing on his legacy, teaching and loving. But the revelation that he was sterile years ago had shattered that dream. And now, the imminent approach of death made everything even more unbearable. The reality was clear. He was completely alone. In the following days, Flavio isolated himself even more. Important meetings were canceled. Calls from business partners were ignored. Life outside went on, but he couldn't find the strength to participate in it. His mind was stuck in a cycle of regret and self-pity. However, loneliness wasn't his only companion. One silent afternoon, as he stared at the ceiling, the phone rang. The sound seemed invasive, out of place in that sad environment. He looked at the screen. It was Anna, a longtime friend. Even though he didn't feel like it, he answered it. "Hi, Flavio. You've been missing, huh? I was starting to get worried." Anna's cheerful voice contrasted with Flavio's somber mood. He sighed, trying to gather the strength to answer. "Hi, Anna. I need to talk to you about something." Before he could continue, she interrupted him. "Oh, let's leave that for later, okay? I have something super important to ask you. I need 10,000 riois to go on a trip with some friends. You know how it is, right? A little time to relax." Her words were like a punch in the stomach. Flavio remained silent, trying to process what he had just heard. She didn't even ask how he was, nor did she notice the weight in his voice. To her, too, he was just a resource, someone from whom something could be taken. "Flavio, are you there?" Anna insisted, impatient with the silence. He held the phone for a moment, his heart heavy and his vision blurred with anger and sadness. Without saying a word, he hung up. That was the last straw. More than ever, Flavio realized that he was surrounded by people who didn't really care about him. All that mattered to them was what he was doing, that he could offer financially. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he felt the crushing weight of the truth. How could I have been so blind all these years, all this time, to nothing? But in that moment of despair, a small flame began to ignite inside him. Something changed. "I still have time. Not much, but enough," he whispered to himself. Maybe it was too late for many things, but he decided it wasn't too late to change what was left of his life. Maybe there was still a chance to find something real, something that no amount of money could buy. And so, for the first time in a long time, Flavio began to plan something that didn't involve profits or investments, but a rescue of his own soul. Flavio got out of bed the next morning with an uncertain purpose, but something inside him had changed. For the first time in weeks, he decided to leave the house. He dressed in simple clothes, slippers on his feet, without the pretense of looking like the successful man everyone knew. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he felt like he needed to breathe, to get out of that golden prison. The streets seemed different. The brightness of the city contrasted with the gray fog that still enveloped his heart. As he walked, each step seemed lighter and heavier at the same time, as if the world was trying to teach him something he didn't yet understand. On the way, a small market caught his attention. The simple facade and the routine movement of people coming and going seemed comforting. He entered and walked through the aisles aimlessly, scanning the shelves as if searching for something that even he could not define. On the way out, something stopped him. Beside the entrance, an elderly lady was sitting on a small chair, selling roses. Her face was marked by deep wrinkles, but her eyes carried a serene sweetness. Her hands, slightly trembling, carefully arranged the flowers. "A rose, young lady?" she asked, her voice soft as a murmur in the wind. Flavio stopped. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Her invitation seemed so simple, but it carried something he couldn't explain. Instinctively, he put his hands in his pockets, only to realize that he had left the house without his wallet. "Oh, I forgot my wallet," he hummed, disconcerted. "Sorry." The lady looked directly at him, as if she could see through his sadness. With a gentle smile, she took a rose and held it out to him. "Here, it's free. You seem to be going through a tough time. I hope this can make your day a little better." Flavio stood still, surprised by her unexpected kindness. Her words, so simple, penetrated deep into his heart. He took the rose carefully, almost as if he were handling something sacred. I don't know what to say. Thank you so much," he murmured, feeling a mixture of gratitude and shame. The lady simply nodded. "Sometimes a small gesture is all we need," she said, before returning to arranging the other flowers on her stand. As he walked back home, Flavio held the rose as if it were a symbol of something greater, something he was still trying to understand. Each step seemed to carry a new urgency, a new determination. The lady's gesture had touched something in him, something that none of his material possessions or the people around him had been able to awaken. When he arrived home, Flavio placed the rose in a small vase on the living room table. It seemed out of place amidst the extravagant decor, but at the same time, it filled the room with a special meaning. Sitting on the couch, he stared at the flower, reflecting on what he had just experienced. How can someone so simple be so generous, he thought, while those who have so much around them only know how to ask for more? It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. Maybe it was crazy, maybe it would lead nowhere, but it was something he needed to do. Still holding the rose, Flavio whispered to himself, "I'm going to change. There's still time, even if it's just to leave something good behind." The first step had been taken. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Flavio spent the rest of the day looking at the rose, lost in thought. The simplicity of that gesture, coming from a stranger, touched him in a way that no one in his life had managed to do. The rose seemed like a symbol of something greater, a genuine kindness that he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if the lady had given him not just a flower, but a new perspective. As night fell, a bold idea began to take shape. What if I could find more people like her, he thought. People who value what really matters, who don't see the world only through money or what it can buy. Flavio knew he was surrounded by people who only cared about what he could offer financially. He had friends and colleagues who disappeared when there was no clear advantage for them, but they would reappear the moment they needed something. The lady's gesture made him realize that perhaps there were different people out there, but finding them would require courage and sacrifice. "I need to get out of this bubble," he decided. "I need to know what it's like to be an ordinary person without the weight of my last name or my bank account." In the days that followed, Flavio began working on a plan. He opened his closet and chose the oldest clothes he had. He took out a pair of worn jeans, a worn-out shirt, and a pair of flip-flops that had seen better days. The reflection in the mirror surprised him. He almost didn't recognize the man he saw. The messy hair, the unshaven beard, the unassuming posture, all seemed to form a new identity. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, but there was something encouraging about that madness. For the first time in years, Flavio felt like he was doing something without thinking about the return, without thinking about impressing anyone. He was searching for something real, something that could fill the emptiness he felt. The next morning, he left home wearing his disguise. He walked through the streets, feeling the stares of the people. He was no longer the respected businessman. He was just another ordinary man in the crowd. He passed by a square and decided to sit on one of the benches. As he watched the movement around him, an even more radical idea came to his mind. What if I put myself in the shoes of the people I've always ignored? He thought. He looked at the ground, hesitant, and then extended his hand as if he were begging for alms. The idea seemed absurd, but Flavio was determined to go all the way. People's reactions were quick and painful. Some walked by in a hurry, pretending he didn't exist. Others looked at him with contempt, as if he were invisible or unwanted. One woman even made a cruel comment. "Go to work, you bum." Flavio had never felt so humiliated. He, who was used to being respected, now saw the world from a completely different perspective. The weight of judgment and indifference was crushing. But even so, he stood there, trying to understand people, and perhaps himself. As he reflected on the cruelties he faced, something surprising happened. A child, no more than 12 years old, stopped in front of him. The boy had curious eyes and a shy smile. "Sir, why are you sad?" the boy asked. Flavio was surprised by the direct question. For a moment, he forgot his disguise and answered honestly, "Because I feel like no one cares about me." The boy tilted his head thoughtfully. "My mother says that when we are sad, helping someone can make us feel better." He pulled a coin from his pocket and placed it in Flavio's hand. "It's all I have, but I hope it helps you." Flavio was speechless. He held the coin as if it were a treasure, feeling the tears streaming down his face. In that moment, he realized that despite all the coldness he had faced, there was still goodness in the world, even in the simplest forms. Back home, Flavio looked at the coin and the rose, both now on his desk. He felt like he was at the beginning of something bigger. He didn't yet know where his journey would take him, but he was determined to keep going. There is still hope, he thought. There are still people who see beyond what money can buy. And so, with a renewed heart, Flavio decided that he would continue his search for something true, something that could give meaning to his last days. The journey was only just beginning. With the rose and the coin on the table, Flavio felt that the child's small gesture had rekindled something he didn't know still existed: hope. He looked around his luxurious home, with expensive furniture and artwork on the walls, and realized that none of it was worth anything if he couldn't share it with someone who truly cared. The next day, he decided to continue his search. He put on his worn-out clothes again, ruffled his hair, and put on his old slippers. This time, however, he had a clearer goal: to find someone who would see beyond his appearance, who would treat him as a human being and not as a status symbol. Flavio returned to the square where he had been the day before. He sat down on the same bench and began to observe the people around him. He decided to test their reactions, approach a few people, and ask for help. Not money, but attention, a look of compassion, anything that would show that he was still seen as someone worthy of humanity. The first person he met was a man in a suit with a shiny briefcase. Flavio approached and said, "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but do you have a minute? I need some help." The man looked him up and down with a look of contempt. "Help? Go to work, my friend. Life gives you nothing for nothing, Grace," he replied, before hurriedly walking away. The answer didn't surprise Flavio, but the coldness still got to him. He tried again with other people: a young woman who pretended not to hear him, a couple who completely ignored him, and a street vendor who just shook his head without saying anything. After so many rejections, Flavio felt the weight of dehumanization. He began to understand what it was like to live on the margins, being invisible to most people. But then, something unexpected happened. As he sat on the bench, a middle-aged woman approached him. She was dressed in simple clothes and carrying a shopping bag. She stopped in front of him and said, "You look tired. Is it okay if I sit here?" Flavio nodded, surprised by her kindness. The woman sat down next to him and pulled an apple from her bag. "Would you like some? It's fresh. I just bought it." He took the apple gratefully, but felt the need to explain. "Thanks, but I'm not really hungry. I'm trying to understand something about people." The woman smiled. "Oh, people. Not all of them are bad, you know. Sometimes they're just caught up in their own worries. But there's always someone who will stop to help if you give them a chance." Her words resonated deeply with Flavio. He realized that he was not only testing others, but also rediscovering something in himself. "Thank you. You're different," he said sincerely. She laughed softly. "Maybe, but I guess I'm just trying to do what my mother taught me. Treat others the way you want to be treated." As the woman got up to leave, Flavio thought about her words. Maybe his quest wasn't just about finding good people, but about learning to value the small gestures and connections that really mattered. As the day drew to a close, he returned home with a clear idea. He would continue his quest, but with a new purpose, not just to find goodness in others, but also to understand how he could be a source of that goodness. Flavio was beginning to realize that what he was searching for wasn't something money could buy, but something that needed to be built with sincerity, patience, and an open heart. Back home, Flavio sat at the table where the rose and the coin still sat, side by side. Both were tangible reminders of the small kindnesses he had encountered. But despite these experiences, he felt like his journey was just beginning. The emptiness inside him had not yet been filled, but something new was driving him. Curiosity about what else he could discover outside his comfort zone. The next day, he decided to change his strategy. Flavio took a small amount of money and returned to the supermarket where he had met the flower lady. His plan was simple: pay for the rose she had given him, and if possible, thank her again for that transformative moment. When he arrived, however, his heart sank. The small flower stand was empty, and the chair where the lady had sat was now abandoned. He waited for some time, observing his surroundings, but there was no sign of her. As he walked through the neighborhood, feeling frustrated, Flavio began to notice other people who, like the lady, lived off small gestures and work. He saw an elderly man selling sweets on a street corner and a young street artist painting portraits for a few bucks. Each of them seemed to be offering something of themselves, something that could not be bought in luxury stores or displayed like a trophy. Flavio decided to interact with them, not to test or question, but to learn. He bought a bag of candy from the man and chatted with the artist while she painted. The stories he heard touched him deeply. Each person had a reason, a struggle, a dream. The elderly man, for example, sold candy to help support his grandchildren, while the young artist saved up to open a small gallery where she could exhibit her art and that of others like her. There was something inspiring about the simplicity of their lives, something that Flavio felt he had lost in his relentless pursuit of success. Why didn't I realize this sooner? He thought. All I did was accumulate money, while these people accumulate stories, experiences, and genuine connections. Back in the square where he had been days before, Flavio sat on the same bench and looked at the people around him with new eyes. He began to notice the details, the smiles exchanged between friends, the father playing with his son, the couple arguing with affectionate gestures. Each interaction was a piece of the puzzle of life that he had neglected for so long. It was then that he decided to take the next step in his journey. If he wanted to find genuine kindness and true connection, he needed to go beyond appearances and build something that made sense. It wasn't enough to observe or interact superficially. He wanted to create bonds, to leave a lasting impression, positive impact, even if small. That night, when he got home, Flavio sat down at his computer and began to write down a plan. He wanted to help the people he had met on his journey, the ones who had shown him the beauty of simplicity. Maybe fund the young artist's gallery, offer support to the elderly man, or even find the lady with the roses and figure out how he could give back what she had given him. I don't know how much time I have left, Flavio thought, remembering Marcelo's words, but I know I can do something that really matters. As the plan began to take shape, he felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Flavio wasn't thinking about himself or his fortune, but about how he could use it to create something that went beyond material goods, something that had a soul. With the plan in mind, Flavio began to act. He decided that his first stop would be the square where he had found the elderly man selling sweets. Flavio knew that in order to help, he would have to be discreet. He didn't want the gesture to be seen as charity, or something done out of vanity. He wanted it to be genuine, something that would really make a difference. When he got to the square, he found the man exactly where he expected, sitting on a bench with his small tray of sweets in front of him. Flavio came over, bought a few packages, and as they chatted, began to ask him subtle questions about his life. "Do you come here every day?" Flavio asked, as he unwrapped a sweet. "Almost every day," the man replied with a tired smile. "My grandchildren need to study, and my pension barely covers the basics, so I do what I can." The simplicity of that answer touched Flavio deeply. He asked more about his grandchildren, about what they wanted to be when they grew up. And the man, his eyes shining with pride, began to talk about their dreams. One wanted to be an engineer, the other a doctor. Flavio decided to act. The next day, he returned to the square with a discreet envelope containing enough money to pay for the man's grandchildren's education for at least 2 years. He handed the envelope over, saying it was just a donation from someone who admired his dedication. The old man was astonished. "I can't accept that," he said, his voice shaking. "Yes, you can," Flavio replied, with a sincere smile. "Consider it an investment in your grandchildren's future. You've already done so much for them, sir. Now it's my turn to contribute." The man's eyes filled with tears, and he held Flavio's hand tightly. "Thank you. May God bless you, young man." From there, Flavio went in search of the young artist he had met. He found her in the same place, painting a new portrait. This time, he brought a blank canvas and asked her to paint it however she wanted, saying that it would be her contribution to the gallery she dreamed of opening. As she painted, Flavio began asking her about the challenges she faced as a street artist. She told him about the difficulties in paying for materials, the rejection she received from some passers-by, and the dream that seemed increasingly distant. When she finished the painting, Flavio did something that surprised her. He offered to finance the start of the gallery. He explained that he believed in her talent and that he wanted to help artists like her have a space to showcase their work. The young woman was silent for a moment, looking at him as if trying to understand if this was real. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, suspicious. Flavio smiled. "Because you reminded me that art has the power to transform, and because I believe that if I can help, it is my obligation to do so." She began to cry, moved, and promised to make good on his trust. Flavio felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. True joy, born from a gesture that expected nothing in return. In the following days, Flavio continued to look for ways to help the people who crossed his path. Each interaction taught him something new, and little by little, he began to realize that he wasn't only helping others, but he was healing himself. That night, when he returned home, Flavio looked at the rose that was still in the vase. It was starting to wilt, but it still maintained a discreet beauty. It was a constant reminder that even the simplest gestures could have an impact. He sat down, opened the notebook where he had been taking notes, and wrote, "I may never meet the lady with the roses again, but what she gave me will never be forgotten. Now, I know that in order to find what really matters, I must continue to give what is most valuable to me: my time, my attention, and my desire to do good." For the first time, Flavio felt that he was living, not just existing. And with that came a peace he had never imagined possible. Flavio felt that he was closer than ever to finding a genuine purpose. But deep down, there was still something that troubled him. The lady with the roses. As much as he had helped others, he felt he knew he needed to reciprocate the gesture that had started this transformation. The image of her, with her kind eyes and welcoming smile, had never left his mind. The next morning, he decided to try one last time. He returned to the supermarket where he had first seen her. walking slowly, as if each step carried the hope of finding her. But when he reached the place, he found only the familiar emptiness. The chair was still there, but there was no sign of the lady. Flavio sat down on the sidewalk nearby, frustrated and lost in thought. Maybe she was just a sign, someone sent to show me the way, he muttered to himself. Still, something inside him refused to give up. It was then that he noticed a younger woman, carrying a small cart full of flowers, approaching the same chair. She began to arrange some roses and flowers in simple arrangements, as if she were continuing the lady's work. Flavio got up and went to her. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know the lady who used to sell flowers here?" The woman looked at him curiously, then smiled. "Yes, I do. She's my mother, but she's home now resting. She hasn't been feeling very well lately." Flavio felt his heart race. Finally, a concrete clue. He hesitated, but decided to be honest. "She gave me a rose a few days ago, without expecting anything in return. That gesture changed my life, and I feel I need to thank her." The young woman smiled again, this time more tenderly. "My mother always said that sometimes a rose can be more powerful than 1,000 words. If you want, I can take you to her. I'm sure she'd be happy to see you." Flavio accepted the offer without thinking twice. The young woman closed the stall and led him to a small house on the outskirts of the neighborhood. It was a simple house with a modest garden full of well-tended flowers. As they entered, a soft voice echoed from the living room. "Rosa, my daughter, who is with you?" The lady was sitting in an armchair, with a blanket over her knees. Despite her fragile appearance, her eyes held the same warm glow that Flavio remembered. When she saw him, she smiled slightly, as if she had been waiting for him. "I knew you would come back," she said, her voice calm. Flavio knelt beside her, holding her hands. "I don't know how to explain the impact of what you did for me that day. Your rose, it opened my eyes to everything I was missing in life. I just wanted to thank you and ask, how can I repay you?" The lady laughed softly and squeezed his hands. "Young man, I didn't give you that rose expecting anything in return. I gave it because I felt you needed it. Sometimes a small gesture is all a person needs to find their own way." Flavio felt tears stream down his face. "But I want to do something, anything. Tell me how I can help you." The lady looked at him tenderly. "If you want to help me, keep spreading kindness, help those in need, and never forget what really matters. That will be more than enough." Before leaving, Flavio noticed a small table with a vase full of wilted roses. He offered to buy new flowers, but the lady kindly declined. "These roses, even when wilted, still have beauty," she explained. "They remind me that life is fleeting, but the impact we make on others can last forever." Back home, Flavio felt renewed. The lady with the roses had given him more than he could have imagined. A mission, a purpose. And now he knew exactly what to do. He had not only found his way again, but also the strength to keep walking. The lady with the roses echoed in Flavio's mind as he drove back home. Spread kindness, help those in need, never forget what really matters. It was more than advice. It was a call to action, a guide for the days ahead. That night, Flavio sat at his desk with the notebook where he had been recording his ideas and plans. The blank page before him seemed daunting, but he knew he needed to fill it with something that went beyond his recent experiences. It needed to be something lasting, something that would impact the lives of others long after he was gone. He began to write frantically, his ideas taking shape. Create a fund to help small entrepreneurs. Inspired by the elderly man who sold candy and the young street artist, Flavio decided that he would use part of his fortune to help people with small businesses or dreams that needed financial support to come true. Open a community space, a place where people could meet, share stories, learn new skills, and support each other. He envisioned a gallery for artists, a community library, and even workshops for young entrepreneurs. Promote anonymous acts of kindness. Did you remember the rose you received from the lady? And the child's coin? He decided to create a campaign to encourage small acts of generosity, spreading the message that a simple gesture can change someone's life. The next morning, Flavio began to turn his ideas into action. First, he sought out a trusted lawyer to structure the fund and ensure that the money would be used transparently and efficiently. Then, he visited the young artist to discuss the possibility of using part of the space where she dreamed of setting up her gallery as the beginning of her community project. She was thrilled with the idea. "It's like you're transforming my dream into something even bigger," she said, smiling with tears in her eyes. In the days that followed, Flavio began to feel renewed energy. Even with the weight of the news of his illness still present, he realized that he no longer had to carry the burden alone. The connection with other people, the small gestures of gratitude, and the stories he heard every day kept him steadfast in his purpose. One morning, while walking through the square where he had begun his journey, Flavio sat down on the bench again. He observed the people around him, but this time with a different perspective. He wasn't there to be ignored or judged. He was there to understand, learn, and continue spreading kindness. Then, a child approached him, holding a bag of candy. "Sir, do you want one?" Flavio smiled, recognizing the boy as one of the grandchildren of the old man who sold candy. "Sure," he said, accepting the candy. "How are things with your grandfather?" "Better now," the boy replied enthusiastically. "He said an angel came and helped us." The boy's words touched Flavio deeply. He knew it wasn't an angel, but he also knew that sometimes a gesture of kindness was all someone needed to see hope. That night, Flavio returned home with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: peace. He looked at the rose, now completely wilted, and decided to keep it in a small glass container as a symbol of all he had learned. "It doesn't matter how much time I have left," he thought. "What matters is what I do with it." And with that, Flavio closed the notebook, satisfied that he had found not only a purpose, but a way to leave something bigger than himself behind for the world. Flavio's days became filled with something he had never experienced before: meaning. Every small action he took seemed to bring a little piece of the happiness he had always sought, but could never find in his possessions or accomplishments. The community around him began to notice the changes. The elderly man who sold candy became a storyteller in the town square, inspiring others with his resilience. The young artist finally opened her gallery, a vibrant space that not only showcased her work, but also offered workshops for children and young talents. And the relief fund Flavio had created began to transform the lives of small entrepreneurs and dreamers who, like him, needed a second chance. Despite all this, Flavio's time was limited. He knew that Marcelo's diagnosis still loomed over him, but instead of feeling fear, he felt gratitude. "If I hadn't heard that news, I might never have realized what really matters," he thought. One afternoon, as he was walking through the square, he saw something that made him stop. Sitting on the same bench where he had sat so many times was the lady with the roses, now more fragile, with her hair even whiter and her eyes tired. She smiled as she saw him approach. "You're back," she said, as if she already knew that their meeting was inevitable. Flavio sat down next to her, gently holding her hands. "I only have one thing to say. Thank you. You gave me more than a rose that day. You gave me a reason to live." The lady smiled, her face lighting up with the same serenity as before. "I only did what my heart told me to. And now, I see that you did much more. You spread that kindness to the world, and that's all that matters." As they talked, Flavio felt an indescribable peace. It didn't matter what the future held. He knew that he had left a legacy that would last far beyond his existence. A few weeks later, Flavio received a call that would change everything again. It was from the hospital. The doctor, in an animated voice, explained that a second diagnosis had revealed that there had been a mistake in the initial exam. "You're healthy, Flavio. There's nothing wrong with you." The news left him speechless. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The life he thought was over had just given him a new chapter. But something inside him had changed. He knew that even if he had more time, he would never be the man he had been before. The journey he had experienced had changed him forever. Flavio decided that he would continue his work, helping others, spreading kindness, and living each day as if it were his last. That night, he took the rose he had kept in the glass container. Although it was wilted, it was still the most powerful symbol of his transformation. He placed it in the center of the table and made a promise to himself. "I will honor the gift I have been given, because life is not about how much time we have, but about what we do with it." And so Flavio began his new beginning, not as the man he had been before, but as someone who finally understood the true value of life. And now I ask you, what would you do if you discovered that you had little time left to live? Flavio believed he was living his last days, but it was in the apparent end that he discovered the true beginning. How many times do we get lost accumulating things, chasing status or seeking validation, when the things that really matter are right in front of us, in simple gestures, in genuine connections, in the ability to help and be helped? Flavio's story is a powerful reminder that we don't need to wait for a diagnosis or a tragedy to change. How about starting today? Look around you, see who needs you, and think, what small act of kindness can you do right now that could transform not only someone's life, but yours as well? And of course, tell me in the comments, what was the simplest act someone has ever done for you that changed your day, or even your life? I want to hear your story. After all, each of us has the chance to be the lady of the roses for someone.